Hi class, we are moving on to the digestive system. We are going to do this note in two parts. So the first part, we are going to start with looking over the different processes, the digestive tract, and we're going to end at the stomach. And then the next note will be on the small and large intestines and how we absorb the nutrients and the accessory organs as well. Okay, so when we're talking about digestive system, we have to look at the four stages that our food goes through. So you have ingestion, which you're taking in the food, digestion, which is going to be the breaking of your food. We use both like physical or mechanical, and then chemical means. Then you need to absorb the nutrients into the blood so that the blood can bring it to the different parts of the bodies and the different cells. And then egestion is going to be your removal of your waste. So you can see kind of through the little cat picture, you have your ingestion, you're bringing in the food, then your digestion is breaking it down. Absorption is getting those small molecules out to the other parts of the body. And then egestion or elimination is removing of the waste. When we talked about digestion, we talked about you have your chemical or mechanical digestion. Chemical digestion is breaking down of your nutrients, so like your carbohydrates, your proteins, your lipids, to smaller molecules using enzymes and other chemical substances. The mechanical digestion is using your physical breakdown, so using force. So you're chewing, you're moving your teeth, you're churning of your stomach, so it's using actual force. Where chemical digestion is using other substances to break it down, like your enzymes or bile, things like that. When we are talking about the digestive tract, we talk about all the places food come into contact with is going to be your digestive tract. And then you also have the accessory organs that help break down food as well. But when you're looking at your digestive tract, it's going to be the tubular part that consists of your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, your small and large intestines, and then the rectum and anus. So it's the path that your food actually travels through. So we're going to kind of work our way through. And as I said, this note ends at the stomach. And then the other note will pick up the small and large intestines and the accessory organs. Okay, so in the mouth, what happens in the mouth? And some of this is going to be a review from grade 10, and that's okay. You are going to have mechanical digestion happening because the teeth is breaking it down, the tongue is moving it around, and it's creating this bolus, which is going to be able to move down the esophagus. The salivary glands, so we have your one above the tongue and then two below the tongue, are going to produce your saliva. Inside the saliva is your amylase enzyme. And what an enzyme is an enzyme is a structure that helps break down molecules. It can build them as well, but we're not going to worry about that one as much. We're looking at enzymes that primarily take large molecules and break them down into smaller molecules. So the amylase enzyme is going to take your starches, so your carbohydrates, and they're going to break them down into your disaccharide chains. So this one has a polysaccharide chain here. This amylase enzyme is going to break it into smaller pieces, and so that it can be broken down even smaller and is able to absorb into our blood. Okay, so if you remember from the previous note, your starches, your carbohydrates, they're going to be primarily made up of your glucose or your monosaccharides, and that's what we need to be able to absorb in our blood. And so these amylase enzymes help break them down into smaller molecules. Okay, so let's kind of just recap. In the mouth, we have your mechanical digestion, teeth, tongue moving that food around, breaking it down physically. And then you have in the saliva the amylase, which is going to be an enzyme that breaks down your carbohydrates. Okay, in the mouth, once you kind of have that breakdown happening, the tongue is going to create this bolus. Okay, and the chewing and the saliva and the tongue moving around, you're now to create this bolus, which is going to get pushed back in your throat and then eventually down the esophagus. But we don't want that food going into the trachea because that's getting into our lungs. So how do we prevent that? What does our body have that prevents that? That's going to be the epiglottis, and that it prevents food from getting into your trachea. When this bolus makes its way to the esophagus, it has to kind of essentially get pushed there. It does have gravity kind of working with it as well, but it has this involuntary muscle contraction called peristalsis that moves the food through the whole digestive tract, not just in the esophagus, but this is really the first time we're actually going to see it. And so what you do is you actually have these longitudinal muscles that are going to contract behind it and then constantly pushing that bolus down to the stomach. Once that bolus hits the stomach, we are going to see both mechanical and chemical digestion happening. How mechanical happens is based on the muscle contractions of our stomachs. It's going to be mixing that food around. There's going to be specific types of enzymes there that are going to work and break down chemically through your enzymes. So the main nutrient that's going to be broken down in our stomach is going to be proteins, not the lipids, not the carbohydrates. As we know, carbohydrates already started in the mouth, but they will pick back up when we get to the small intestine. One thing you'll notice about when we talk about chemical digestion is the amylase enzyme that was in the mouth. When it makes its way to the stomach, it's no longer active. So it can't continue on breaking down the carbohydrates because once that pH changed, those enzymes are not functioning anymore. So the only way amylase will work is if it's in a relatively neutral pH similar to the mouth. Where the next enzyme that we're going to talk about shortly only works at a very acidic pH, so only functions in the stomach. So that pH change allows for your enzymes to only function at a specific location. Okay, and we'll come back to that. When we get to the stomach, so as that bolus is moving down the esophagus, it has to pass through different sphincters to allow it into the stomach. So the opening from the esophagus to the stomach is known as your gastroesophageal sphincter, and it will allow food to get in. It's also there to prevent kind of acid reflux, where you get stomach acid going up into the esophagus. So it's there as kind of a protective measure for our esophagus as well. When digestion is finished in the stomach and that substance needs to move to the intestine, it's going to pass through the pyloric sphincter. And that is allowing food to get through and not just constantly allowing that stomach acid into the intestine, because that's not healthy either. So when we're looking at the stomach is made up of 4 layers. Okay, so the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and the serosa are going to be our 4 layers. You can kind of see in the diagram here, you have the mucosa, submucosa, the muscularis, and the serosa. Okay, and so when you're looking at those layers, what they do is we're going to kind of work our way from the out of the stomach into the inside of the stomach, just so you're kind of aware. So a little bit opposite than what they are in your know. So the serosa is holding the stomach in place. And the one thing it does too is it eliminates friction between organs. So it's there kind of as a way to help protect friction of the organs and to hold the stomach where it is. It's going to be your outside layer. Then you're getting into the muscularis, which is going to be your smooth muscle. And when you see smooth muscle, it means it's involuntary contractions, so you don't need to think about the process, okay? And so you're going to have it in different directions. You're going to have the longitudinal, your circular, your obliques, so that it allows for it to kind of constantly allow the stomach to kind of churn and move in different directions. And once it's been mixed through all that food before it moves into the small intestine is going to be called your chyme. Then you have your next inner layer, which is a submucosa, and it's going to be containing all of your blood vessels and your nerve endings. And so that allows for nutrients to be passed kind of to the cells when they need it. It also brings your enzymes in, your gastric juices, and stuff like that it needs to be able to do. The next inner layer, which is the last one here, is going to be the mucosa. It has kind of all these little folds in it, kind of like your villi. And what it allows for is the secretion of your gastric juices. So enzymes, hydrochloric acid, things like that. Those layers are undergoing mitosis at such a rapid rate so that they can replace any damaged cell because the pH of our stomach is so acidic. So one thing about that is that rapid cell division to replace any cells. So these 4 layers work together to allow the stomach to do chemical and chemical digestion. So it will do both your mechanical and chemical. Okay, so we kind of talked about, now you had the muscles and how they did mechanical. Now we're going to look at your chemical digestion. So chemical digestion is going to happen in the stomach through, again, those enzymes. The main enzyme that we're going to talk about eventually is pepsin, but we'll get there. Okay, so when we get that food that moves in through mouth, down the esophagus, into the stomach is going to contain mucus, acids, and enzyme that help break down food. Okay, what happens is once food has entered the stomach, there's nerve endings in that mucosa layer that actually recognize that food has been present. And so it releases a hormone called gastrin. And that gastrin causes the glands to release different substances like your mucus, your hydrochloric acid, and your enzymes. The enzymes that are important in the stomach is this pepsin enzyme. Pepsin is responsible for breaking down proteins into these little tiny amino acids. So if you look here, you got your little protein, that pepsin comes in and it's going to break them down into these individual amino acids. Pepsin just isn't sitting around in the stomach waiting to be used. Okay? It gets released in the form of what's called pepsinogen. So it's kind of like your pre-enzyme. Pepsinogen reacts with the hydrochloric acid, changes its structure, and then it becomes activated into this pepsin enzyme that now can break down your proteins. So just so you kind of realize, so we had that amylase enzyme in the mouth that was doing carbohydrates. Once it hits the stomach, the pH is too low, amylase stops working. Then you get pepsinogen released. The hydrochloric acid allows it to become pepsin, which pepsin is the functioning enzyme to break down your proteins. Okay, so we are going to stop here for the note and leave it at the stomach. And then the next note we'll pick up is going to look at your small and large intestines. Okay, thanks class.